like Woody Allen in Annie Hall, only with better hair. But still not a patch on Zac Efron's hair. Have I told you how much I like Zac Efron? How much his screen presence reminds me of a better time when movie stars learned their craft in vaudeville, earned their spurs tap dancing on stage, and then signed their lives away to movie studios who would put them on a treadmill and micromanage their careers into the grave, bizarrely creating some great works of art in the process. For me, Zac was cut from the same cloth as Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, hard-working hoofers who put their heart and soul into entertaining the audience and who tripped across the screen with an elegance and grace that was at once delightful and heartbreaking. Johnny Depp is the same, an anachronistic silent movie star who seems to have been washed up on the shores of the talkies, a devotee of Buster Keaton who's not afraid to act with his body rather than just his eyes. Oh, don't get me wrong, he's absolutely rubbish in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, the worst Anthony Newley impression since David Bowie, even if he insisted it is meant to be Keith Richards, and ironically excruciating in Benny and June, in which he effectively plays Buster Keaton with toe-curling results. But take a look at his performance in Jim Jarmusch's monochrome western Dead Man, and then tell me that Depp is not one of the greatest silent actors of his generation. I once interviewed Neil Young, who did the soundtrack to Dead Man, and he remembered telling Jarmusch that he'd made a wonderful silent movie and it would be a shame to spoil it. He went on to record what was effectively a live musical accompaniment, playing his clanging, echoey guitar direct to picture as if he were an ad hoc accompanist performing right there in the theatrical auditorium. To this day it baffles me that Dead Man is not more highly regarded or widely seen by fans of Jarmusch, Young and Depp, who must surely amount to tens of millions. If only a tenth of those who shelled out for the Pirates abominations had paid to buy a ticket for Dead Man, then intelligent independent cinema would be in far better financial shape all round. Hey-ho. As for Zac, while he's unlikely to tread the offbeat indie path anytime soon, although Me and Orson Welles was a step in the right direction, I love the fact that he's trying to broaden his dramatic palette without alienating the tweeny fan base who first made him a star, and without whose affections he wouldn't be where he is today. Many modern movie stars spend hours whinging about how hard it is to be shackled to a hyperactively hormonal young audience, but intriguingly, they only tend to do so after enthusiastically courting and winning their affections in the first place. You don't hear them bleating when no one knows them from a hole in the ground, or running around telling everybody how fabulous it is to be an utter failure, an anonymous waffle waiter rather than an overpaid teen idol. The honest truth is that today's female teenage audiences have, in general, been pretty poorly served by a movie industry that seems to think acne-ridden boys are the only demographic worth targeting. If you're a 13-year-old girl, and I understand very well that if you're listening to this book then you're probably not, you have more right to complain about the parlous state of modern cinema than anyone else in the auditorium. Just as the producers of the drive-in horror movies of the 50s and 60s figured that the boys were going to be buying the tickets to the movies which made the girls seek refuge in the safety of their sweaty arms, so today's studio heads still seem to believe that the viewing market is dominated by young men, and hence all movies should be aimed at them, with an occasional something for the ladies thrown in to give the appearance of balance. I once heard a cinema manager attempting to tell a potential ticket-buying customer that whilst Transformers was essentially a boys' flick, big robots hitting each other, you know the drill, it would also appeal to girls because it had some romance, i.e. the sight of Megan Fox's arse bending over the bonnet of a car and some jokes about Shia LaBeouf wanking. Apparently this is what now passes for gender equality in tweeny cinema. Back to Zac and Charlie St. Cloud. The film started, and almost immediately I was annoyed. Why? Not because the film wasn't any good, which I already knew it was, but because none of us in the auditorium, whether in standard or premium seating, was seeing the whole picture, thanks to the kind of sloppy projection that has become symptomatic of the modern multiplex experience. As I have mentioned elsewhere, I am completely anal on the subject of correct screen ratios, and not only do I need to see a film from the very beginning to the very end, I also need to see the whole image as it was meant to be projected. And in this particular case, I doubt very much whether director Burr Steers had intended the uppermost part of his frame to be cut off. The problem was simple. The film wasn't aligned correctly, and therefore the image was spilling over the top of the screen and onto the shabby masking which supposedly marked the upper border of the picture. The solution was equally simple. either rack the picture down a few inches or move the masking, or change the lens or the aperture or something, whatever. The projectionist would know what to do, and presumably they were about to do it. For various reasons, the first few moments of a movie are often accompanied by a degree of image correction, as the projectionist looks out from the soundproof box and realises that something's not quite right up there on the screen. Occasionally, the problem will be major. The film will be back to front or upside down, having been loaded into the projector the wrong way round, and everything has to be shut down for a few moments in order to reload. At other times, the image will be the wrong shape or size, usually because the projector has the wrong lens attached, but again, this can be rectified fairly swiftly once the problem has been noted. As for incorrect racking or alignment, this can be tweaked by a deft projectionist who, in an ideal world, will also have control of the black curtains and movable borders that frame the screen. Ideally, such issues should be sorted out in advance, but as anyone who's ever worked in a fast turnaround cinema knows, this isn't always possible. So it's generally taken as read that the first few moments of a film may involve a degree of fiddling about which no one is going to complain. Or are they? Frankly, at £8.50 a ticket, £10 for premium, where the picture problems will be just the same, I figure they ought to have tested the damn thing in advance. But hey, everyone makes mistakes, and it would only take a moment to fix. As soon as the projectionist looked at the screen, they'd know it looked wrong, which would be any moment now. Any moment now. They'd look out of their box and realise that the top of Zach's head was missing. Or at least the top of his hair, which was just as bad. Worse, in fact. Any moment now. Just has to look out of their box, at the screen, at Zach's head, and his hair, or lack of it. Any moment now. Any moment. Any moment. Oh, for fuck's sake. I got up out of my seat, easy when it's an aisle, C, and strode purposefully out of the theatre in search of an usher. There weren't any, as we know. So I strode all the way back down the corridor, right back to the huge queue for the comestibles and ticket stand that still snaked all the way out into the foyer, and accosted someone wearing what appeared to be the uniform of the establishment in question. "Can you tell the projectionist to check the picture in screen 7, I said, with what I believed to be an air of firm authority. "The picture's spilling over the top of the screen." The uniformed monkey gazed at me with an air of blank bewilderment. He appeared to be just hitting puberty. Right there. Right then. Right in the middle of the lobby by the look of him. "What?" he drawled. I took a deep breath. This was going to be annoyingly complicated. Let's try and make it simple. "The projectionist," I said slowly and clearly, "in screen 7 needs to adjust the picture, or to move the masking, by about a foot. Can you tell him, or her, please?" The pubertal monkey stared at me, slack-jawed, his mouth grasping at word-like shapes, but his vocal cords too bored to go to the effort of actually making a noise. "Please?" I asked again. The monkey turned and pulled something chunky and weather-beaten from out of the waistband of his trousers. To my amazement, it appeared to be a walkie-talkie. Could he possibly operate such a high-tech device? Apparently so. He pushed a button and held the machine to his head, where it let out a high-pitched screeching sound, causing him to jump a little and recoil in terror. So maybe he couldn't, after all. I imagined that would be the end of it, but no, he was going to have another go. He looked at the machine again, shook it, pressed the same button, waited for the awful howling noise, got nothing, and then gingerly lifted the receiver back towards his face. "Roger," he whispered, hesitantly, with just a hint of fear. Nothing. "Roger," he said again, this time a little louder, a little more assertive. But answer came there none. He decided to give it one last go. "Roger!" he shouted into the machine at a volume which meant Roger would probably have heard were he anywhere in the cinema complex, whether the walkie-talkie was working or not. Presumably, most of the audience in screen 7, where I was currently missing Charlie St. Cloud in the same way that Zach's head was missing the screen, heard it too. So much for turning off your mobile phones for the consideration of others. But apparently Roger had heard nothing, or if he had, he was staunchly refusing to answer the call of duty. Clearly, Roger had about as much enthusiasm for this cinema as I did. Then, with a flash of inspiration, Monkey Boy remembered something and took his finger off the button he'd been depressing since this strange procedure began. Suddenly, the machine in his hand leapt into squawking, shrieking life again, catching a raised voice mid-sentence that one could only assume belonged to the aforesaid Roger. "Your finger off the button, you muppet!" Monkey Boy blanched and put his finger straight back on the button to silence any further outburst. Taking control of the situation, he raised his chin, brought the walkie-talkie very close to his lips while surreptitiously turning down the volume control, and said, in a voice which sounded uncannily like those automated train information systems that claim to be robotically sorry when your service is delayed, "Please come immediately to the ticketing area where customer assistance is required. Thank you, over and out." And with that he clicked the intercom off as swiftly as possible and jammed it back down into his waistband. It was a deft move, made all the more impressive by the fact that I'd been rather surprised to discover that he could speak, and the combination of language skills and manual dexterity had caught me quite off guard. I wasn't sure whether to applaud, like you do in the circus when a chimpanzee peels a banana with its feet while riding a tricycle and wearing a bowler hat, or to laugh, like we used to do when those unhappy primates in the PG Tips commercials pretended to push musical instruments up a flight of stairs. "Dad, do you know the piano's on my foot?" "You hum it, son, I'll play it." As it transpired, neither response would have been appropriate, as this callow youth clearly had no intention of making eye contact or engaging in small talk. He was not, in industrial terms, customer-facing. Although, this being the case, it was hard to know exactly what he was facing. It seemed to me that when approached by a ticket-buying customer, his only response had been to send out for reinforcements, presumably to neutralise the threat to his personal space. For all I knew, the phrase "customer assistance required" meant that he, rather than I, needed the assistance, presumably to protect him from the customer, and what was required was for me to be neutralised forthwith. Whatever. Having made audio contact with Roger, he had apparently done his bit for Queen and Country, and he wasn't going to do anything else except stand there and hope I wouldn't notice him. Out of politeness, I didn't. So we both stood there, saying nothing, waiting for Roger, like characters in a Beckett play. Only, unlike a Beckett play, Roger did actually arrive. Quite quickly, in fact. Or at least more quickly than I had expected, considering how long everything else had taken in this bloody hellhole. For all I knew, by the time I'd explained the problem to Roger, the projectionists would have woken from their slumber, looked out of their box, noticed the absence of Zach's usually fabulous hair, and adjusted the picture all by themselves, thus making my laborious intervention utterly unnecessary and making me look like a bit of a fool. Maybe I was missing out on some perfectly projected Zach right now, hanging around moaning in the lobby when I should have been relaxing in the luxurious comfort of premium seating. I was starting to wish I'd stayed put. But here was Roger, smiling, ambulant, comparatively grown up, and apparently unaware that I had overheard his recent untempered radiophonic outburst. "Hi, I'm Roger," he said, somewhat extraneously, but with the air of a man who was well on his way to becoming assistant manager in the very near future. Clearly Roger was the guy to be dealing with, and all my trials, Lord, would soon be over. Perhaps they were over already. Who knew? But Roger was keen to help. "What seems to be the trouble?" he asked, like the go-getting, problem-solving sort of chap he so clearly was. "Well," I began, relieved to be dealing with someone with the power to make things happen. "It's nothing terrible. It's just that the projectionist in screen 7 needs to adjust the picture a little because it's spilling over the top of the screen." "I see," said Roger, giving every impression that he did, although with noticeably less bonhomie than he appeared to be exuding about 10 seconds ago, before I started telling him about the problem in screen 7. There was a bit of an awkward silence. I wasn't quite sure why, but I decided to fill it anyway. "So, if you could just tell the projectionist in screen 7 to—" "He's not in screen 7, said Roger,